plan, fast drafting, who skip around, just write the dialogue. Save, save, save. Every time you do a big redraft or a big rewrite or a big edit, to save as and create a new document. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Rhian Edwards, a middle paranormal and fantasy author, and today we're carrying on with my tips and hacks series for writing, and today we're going to look at drafting. So let's get into the video. Before we start, if you do like this video and this sort of content, please give it a like and think about subscribing. I would love to have you as a viewer as I talk more about the writing process. So drafting, it's probably one of the biggest things that we first encounter, which is the writing aspect of our work. So my first tip, hack, whatever you want to call it, is to plan. And by that, I don't mean necessarily in depth. But from my experience, even those who we might call pantsters, who just sort of write off the seat of their pants, even a lot of those writers tend to like having some form of idea of that outline in their head. Maybe not necessarily really in depth. It may only be like they have this end point, or they have an idea of these couple of scenes that they have. But from what I've heard and from what I've found really helpful is that noting those things down is really beneficial, especially when you forget things as you move on in your plot world and things like that. I didn't do that for my debut duology, and I got really lost on the plot. So now, and then I think I did go the opposite way and plan really in depth, but it just doesn't seem to work for me. I tried the character profiles and I thought it was really good at the time, but then I think it just sort of like held me back and hindered me because I wasn't able to sort of be flexible on that because I'd done all this work beforehand. So I like to have an outline of almost chapter by chapter of what I want to include, but that's okay because that allows me to sort of like veer off if I need to and expand my characters if I need them to. Whereas when I was trying to do even more than that, like character profiles and setting sheets and all that kind of thing, I then got a little bit lost. So I think I'm definitely probably more towards the planner side than the pantster side by a country mile. But I do think a good tip is to have some idea of what your story is, whether that's just you could have a few notes in a notebook. You could have just the premise of your story written down somewhere, but just something that allows you to go off from that creativity. So my second tip is fast drafting. Now, I don't know if you've heard about fast drafting, and maybe some people do it differently, but the way I see it is that you are solely focused on the drafting. So I'm not thinking about editing at this point. If I see the odd spelling or typo, I might correct it if I'm writing and it's bothering me. But other than that, I don't focus on the grammar, the stylistic stuff, any of the sort of the writing like heart of it, if that makes sense. I'm just focused on the story plot. So there's a few reasons for this. One, if you start editing as you go, that's my chair squeaking. So a few reasons for this. If you start editing as you go, you're a lot slower, and I think it can hinder that creative process. Another reason is that the first draft is meant to be kind of bad, and you're meant to then edit it. The first draft, the idea of the first draft is just to like blurt everything down onto the page, okay? Just literally spew all over the page, spew all your ideas down. It doesn't matter if it doesn't make sense, if you know that's a major plot hole, if you know that paragraph makes no sense whatsoever because you wrote it late at night. Doesn't matter. You are just writing down the story. What I tend to do is I might read the last page when I start writing just so it's refreshed in my mind, but I don't focus on editing as I write, not insofar as an actual edit. And I think that's a really good tip that a lot of authors can benefit from, because again, it just slows down and interrupts the creative process when you stop to edit, and we don't want that. We want to focus on the heart of the story, and then later on you're adding like the muscle and the bones and the skin. Don't know if that got a bit morbid, but you know what I mean. Okay, the next tip is I like to write linearly, But I know a lot of people who skip around, and I think there's pros and cons for both. So I write linearly because I like seeing the story progress as I go. I like knowing where I am in the story. I'm almost writing it as the reader would read it. And there's a lot of pros for that. But when people skip around, that can help if you're getting a bit stuck. Maybe you're stuck on a point that you want to write, or you've got a really good idea for later on, a really good scene, and you're thinking about that, but you're sort of trying to write linearly. That can, again, interrupt the creative process. So skip around if you need to. Write that scene, save it somewhere. You can write whole chapters and come back to them and save it somewhere and then add them in later. There's no reason why you can't do that. I know several authors who don't write linearly and it works really well for them. So don't be afraid if you're getting stuck at a point and you've got a really good idea to go and write that scene, to go and write that chapter, because that's going to help fuel that creative process. Okay, my next hack is something that I was told many months ago. I can't even remember, probably years ago now. So if you're struggling with dialogue in your story, and I don't mean the actual speech, I mean the whole, writing your dialogue tags, writing the description, everything. If you're focusing on that realistic dialogue, just write the dialogue. And then after, come back in and add the tags in, add the description, add what the actions that you need to happen. There's a couple of reasons for this, but the biggest one is that when you literally just write the dialogue, it can be a lot more realistic because you're just flowing on the speech between the characters. You know who's saying what, so you can come back later and add those tags in where they're needed. But it allows you to focus on the speech itself and the dialogue itself. And then the readers, that'll feel more authentic to your readers, because dialogue can be tricky for authors to make it sound like realistic, like it would in everyday life as you're talking. So that's a really good tip that I think will help a lot of people. So let me know down below if you've ever done that, because I would be very interested to hear that. I do think dialogue's one of my stronger suits, so I've not always had to do this, but when it's like a really tough emotional scene and you're trying to convey that emotion, it can be really helpful. Okay, the next point I think goes without saying, and that is save, save, save. And I think everyone knows this, but I do think it's important to keep reminding people to save. I think I need to save more. Sometimes I send an email with my document in to myself just so I have it somewhere else. I probably should be better. I should look into that cloud thing. But I think I would go into a hole and not climb out of it if my laptop died. So save. My last point is, and this is one that I really enjoy and I do religiously since I started writing Hunted, the first book in my Bloodline series, is every time you do a big redraft or a big rewrite or a big edit, to save as and create a new document. Then you can, it's really cool to see the progress as you go through each draft. But also, if you delete a scene that you don't think you need, and then later on you think, I sort of do need that, you've got it. You can go back into an older document and bring it over. Honestly, this has saved me several times before. And in fact, I rewrote the first third of book 2 after some beta advice. And that is now becoming the basis of my short story, which is coming out in May, because it was all about the original alliance. So it's really important to keep old work. I think that's a really good tip. I have certainly used that many times before. And it's also, like, I know I touched on it a second ago, but I do find it really cool looking back at like the first draft you wrote and then what does it look like now? It's quite interesting to see. So I think they're all my tips and hacks for drafting. Some of them are really blatantly obvious, but it's always worth being reminded. And these are just some of the tips and hacks that I think work well and have worked well for me as well. So I'd like to know if any of them have worked well for you and what other tips and hacks you have. Let me know down below. Okay guys, I'll see you in my next tips and hacks video. Until then, bye!